Recording in progress.
To order at 9:02 a.m. First up on the agenda is introductions. I'm Nancy Wise, Commissioner and Chair.
Pat Malone, Commissioner and Vice Chair.
Zan Ojuro, Commissioner.
Joe Kirby, County Administrator.
Vance Crummy, County Council.
We'll go to the audience first.
Corey Grogan, Public Information Officer.
Erica Milo, Board Reporter.
All right, and we will move to our guests online for introductions.
Jeff Van Arsdal, Benton County Sheriff.
Joe Missler, Human Resources.
Mariah De La Vega, Board of Commissioners Reception.
Ashley Talamontes, Benton County Behavioral Health.
All right, is there anyone else online that would like to introduce themselves?
Shannon Bush, Community Development Program Coordinator.
Mara Sargent, Benton County Public Health.
Sam Chapman, Executive Director of the Healing Advocacy Fund.
My name is Kevin Kanega. I'm a Benton County resident.
All right, and I see we have a couple new members of the sitting in the audience that joined us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, good morning. This is Darren Nichols, Community Development Director for Benton County. Greg Reddick, Deputy Director of Community Development. Anna Reddick, Solid Waste and Water Quality Program Coordinator.
All right, welcome everyone. Next on the agenda is announcements. Are there any announcements? Hearing none, we will move to comments from the public. If you would like to provide comments, you may have up to 3 minutes. Is there anyone in the room that would like to testify? Seeing none, is there? Oh.
It looks like Nancy Whitcomb would like to make a comment in the chat.
Perfect. Is there anyone on the internet, on our virtual, that would like to make a comment? Please put your name. I see that Nancy has already done so. Nancy, go ahead, unmute and proceed.
Hi, thank you very much. Nancy Whitcomb, 37049 Moss Rock Drive. I spoke last meeting about how it's a big ask for volunteers to devote 8 to 10 months to the process recommended by Mr. Imparati. And I would just like to briefly comment and suggest that if the landfill is unwilling to commit to holding off on a new CUP for the landfill expansion until the process recommended by Mr. Imparati is complete, the work group focus on revamping Chapter 77 in lieu of specifically the CUP process. I realize this is a little bit land nerdy, but I think it's important that the efforts by any work group and their time not be wasted in this important job. Thank you very much.
Next, I see Joel Greer or Grier. Please correct my pronunciation. Go ahead and unmute. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Yeah, my name is Joel Geyer. I'm at 38566 Highway 99W, north of Corvallis. And I would also like to comment on the idea that's on the agenda as old business to go forward with this plan for meetings. I will say, as a landfill neighbor, I was skeptical about this from the beginning, and I'm even more concerned when I see the outcome, which is to put the focus on clarifying existing criteria and information requirements for the CUP process, and then inviting the applicant to actually be part of that process. To me, this is a little bit like remember the story of the three little pigs. All the pigs get into the brick house finally at the end, and then the planning official comes around and says, "Oh, we'd like you to meet with the big bad wolf and discuss the criteria for building code for now on." It just doesn't make sense to me as a local resident that they should be part of that group that decides our local policies. So thank you.
And I believe I see Kevin Kanega's hand. Kevin, would you like to speak? You have 3
Yes, I
minutes.
would. Thank you. So I'd just like to ask that before we move forward with any of this community engagement with Sam's recommendations, that there is definitely some kind of commitment, more than some kind of commitment, a real commitment from the landfill that they'll hold off on any activity towards a conditional use permit until things are completed. Benton County already spent over $16,000, I believe, on a preliminary, just to get a report that really just, basically says that we don't have enough information. We don't know what's going on. Our little community has tried to put forth a lot of information to share, and it's considered facts. And although we haven't had any rebuttal to that, it doesn't seem like it's really getting enough attention or being used in the decision making. As I pointed out, or tried to point out last week, with continuing with having a hauling agreement for 10 years with Republic. So I really feel before the county goes and spends our tax dollars, more of our tax dollars to benefit Republic's landfill expansion, there is some kind of commitment from them. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kevin. Is there anyone else who would like to speak today? Last call for anyone else who would like to provide public comment today. Seeing none, we will move on. We will review and approve the agenda. I believe there are no changes that we need to make to the agenda. I will consider that approved. And with that, we will move into our work session, item 4.1. We have the advocacy group's request to present information to the commissioners regarding Measure 109, psilocybin therapy in Oregon. And I believe we have Sam Chapman with us, the Executive Director of Healing Advocacy Fund. Welcome.
Hi, Commissioners. Good morning, and thank you for having me. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we will get this show on the road here. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, everyone, my name is Sam Chapman. I'm the Executive Director of the Healing Advocacy Fund. For context, I was also the campaign manager for Measure 109, so I'm intimately familiar with the text of the measure itself. And I'm here to talk just a little bit about what the measure is, what it isn't, give you an update on rulemaking, and then I want to reserve as much time as possible for what I hope to be a fruitful questions and answers time period as well. So a little bit about the Healing Advocacy Fund. We're a nonprofit 501c3 supporting the thoughtful and effective implementation and education of the nation's first ever psilocybin therapy program, which Oregon voters approved in November of 2020. And actually, give me 1 second here. I'm just going to move this. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and move into a little bit of a recap on the current situation of mental health, which I'm sure commissioners are more than familiar with. According to a recent survey conducted by the CDC, 1 in 5 Americans are experiencing symptoms of clinical anxiety and depression. And unfortunately now, due to COVID-19 pandemic, now over 1/3 of Oregonians are saying they're experiencing symptoms amid the country's coronavirus pandemic. Here in Oregon, the mental health crisis is very acute. Oregon's mental health crisis is actually the 3rd worst in the country currently. With that being said, over the last 5 to 10 years, we've started to see a lot of research on psilocybin, a naturally occurring compound in various forms of mushrooms. There's been a ton of studies that have come out over the last 5 years or so from leading medical research institutions such as Johns Hopkins, UCLA, University of Alabama, NYU, and others, showing that psilocybin has real promise for uniquely being effective in being able to help treat depression, end-of-life anxiety, and addiction. And it's actually shown so much promise that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has granted it a breakthrough therapy designation, simply meaning that it may demonstrate substantial improvement above and beyond what is currently available today. And to the measure. I want to make sure, are my slides advancing okay? Are people seeing those? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great, sorry, just wanted to make sure. So the goal of Measure 109 is fairly straightforward, is to create a licensing and regulatory framework to serve those who seek psilocybin therapy that can safely benefit from it. So these are some of the pillars of Measure 109. It establishes a regulatory framework within the Oregon Health Authority that will allow trained practitioners to administer psilocybin services at specially licensed centers. It also established the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board appointed by the governor, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides here. And also imposed a 2-year development period before initial licenses are granted. And it also requires the establishment of a training and licensure system for facilitators, manufacturers, testing labs, and service centers. And of course, there will be a tracking system for all psilocybin products as well. And I want to talk a little bit about the 4 steps of a psilocybin, of the psilocybin process itself. The first is assessment. The first 2 steps really here are grounded in safety and vetting. And so the assessment is really where someone who is thinking about accessing psilocybin services will provide information on their health background. This will allow a facilitator to really determine whether or not, 1, this person is ready for psilocybin services themselves, and 2, whether or not they're a good match with the facilitator. There's going to be people who are seeking psilocybin services for a variety of reasons, and it's going to be really important that we have this system set up that really allows people to match a facilitator's background and specialties with someone's specific needs. So that's the first stage, is the assessment. The second is intention setting. This is where the background has gone through, they seem to be a right match, and people will really start to develop the relationship, should they not already have one, with the facilitator, where they can explain the process, incorporate the participants' goals, and develop an individualized safety plan. Every single individual that goes through this process will have a safety plan that will include a whole different host of different precautions, from ensuring that people fully understand the process and what's involved, to the requirements for people to have transportation after a psilocybin session, despite the fact that no one will be intoxicated or under the influence of psilocybin. We still will be requiring that people have transportation to leave the facility. And number 3 is the administration session itself. As I've mentioned a couple of times here, this is where the psilocybin will be administered at a specially licensed center, where the facilitator will be constantly supervising the participant throughout the entire session and will certify the end of the session as well. Again, no psilocybin will be leaving the premise, nor will the participants who are receiving services. And the last step here is the integration session. This is where a participant will meet with a facilitator maybe a few days or a week or so after the session itself to help integrate the insights and learning from the psilocybin experience into daily life. We've seen a lot of research from the clinical institutions mentioned before, that the more integration that can be done, the more unpacking and really absorbing the experience long-term, the longer the positive benefits tend to last for that participant. So just as important as explaining what Measure 109 does do, it's also important to highlight what it does not allow. Again, it's worth repeating, there are no retail sales of psilocybin. There's no off-site consumption, possession, or production of psilocybin. There's no branding or advertising of psilocybin products allowed. You are never going to drive down I-5 and see a billboard for mushrooms. There's no need for that. And there's just no way that that's going to happen under Measure 109. There's also no unregulated, untracked psilocybin production, delivery, or inventory. There are no service centers that will be allowed near schools, and you must be over the age of 21 in order to access these services. So moving into the implementation phase a little bit here. Again, Measure 109 established a 2-year development period after the passage of the law in 2020. This was something that we felt very strongly about in terms of giving ourselves ample time to develop the rules and regulations for this program. I'll talk a little bit more about the rules in a couple of slides as well. I'm sure there's some questions regarding those rules. The Oregon Advisory Board, again, which has been, I deleted that slide, sorry. The Oregon Advisory Board has almost 20 people that were all appointed by the governor, most of them with medical backgrounds that have been helping the Oregon Health Authority develop the rules and regulations for this program. Again, the 4 license types that will exist in this program are facilitator, manufacturer, service center, and testing laboratories for the products themselves. And here's the implementation timeline here. As you can see, we are between the June 2022 and December 2022 aspect. As it relates to the rulemaking, there have been 2 different sets of rulemaking timelines that have actually been deployed. The first was regarding products, training, and testing. Those rules have been codified and are finalized. I emphasize that because there have been a lot of folks that I've spoken with who believe that the rules process is completely unfinished. That is not the case. Over half of the rules that are going to be created have already been codified, and I'd be happy to provide information or answer questions and provide links to those rules as well. The other remaining rules will be finalized in December 2022. The majority of in fact, all of the recommendations made by the governor-appointed advisory board have already been sent to the Oregon Health Authority, and we expect to see a first draft of those rules published in the next 1 or 2 months. I can say that based on the last rulemaking period that happened, about 90 to 95% of the recommendations that were made by the advisory board were adopted into final rules. So once that draft comes out, we'll continue to have a really good idea of the direction that we're heading. And to be honest, we have a really good direction now. And I would actually say, as it relates to local governments, the rules around time, place, and manner, and a lot of the questions that you may have about the rules process or what's remaining, the rules around time, place, and manner exist in the statute. And what is remaining is for you to decide. The Oregon Health Authority is not going to be making any rules that relate to your ability to determine time, place, and manner of these licensed facilities. And just moving forward here into the local control section, Measure 109 set a foundation for state rules and regulations for the psilocybin program to operate within cities and counties. It also gives cities and counties the option to create additional time, place, and manner restrictions on service centers and manufacturers. The base of the program exists throughout the state unless voters choose to opt out by local ordinance on a general election ballot. And some of the TPM related items that I mentioned that exist in the measure are here. So psilocybin service centers cannot locate within a zone exclusively for residential use in cities. It cannot be within 1,000 feet of a school. Psilocybin manufacturers cannot locate within a residence or mixed use property and cannot locate within an area zoned for residential use. And regarding to storage, all psilocybin products have to be secured within the facility. Again, products will not be leaving the facility. And sales also must occur inside the licensed premise. And I've said it again, this is on-site use only. No psilocybin will be leaving the center. This is not a retail model at all. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight here is the vote outcome, specifically in Benton County. Your local residents supported Measure 109 to the tune of 63.4%, even higher in the city of Corvallis. I believe it was 73%. And so just wanted to highlight that fact as well. And I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I would be happy to answer any questions should you have any.
Sure, thank you. And I think what we'll do is go to questions and comments from commissioners first. And then we have invited some staff to comment or ask questions. And I have a couple of questions. Back on the slide, you're talking about rulemaking. Sorry, I think I'm a little confused. So I thought I heard you say the rules are codified and finalized, but then I thought I heard you say something about half the rules and OHA still has to adopt. Could you just clarify that for me, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. So there's two sets of rulemaking timelines that are happening. The first set was related to training, products, and testing. The reason that they split up the rulemaking timelines is because in order for the program to actually be doors open and have people receive services in 2023, people need to go through a training program to then be able to apply for their facilitator license. And so the Oregon Health Authority recognized that and decided to expedite that set of rules. So in theory, we could realize the services being provided in 2023. Again, January 2nd, 2023 is when licenses are going to be made available. We don't expect services to actually be available until later on in 2023. But that was the reason why the OHA expedited that set of rules, again, for training, products, and testing. And those exist on the OHA's website and have been codified. The second set and remaining rules are now in the process of being drafted by the Oregon Health Authority. The governor-appointed board has already made all of their recommendations. Those are also available on the Oregon Health Authority's website. There's a lot of them, and they go into great detail in many different areas. And so that is the second timeline in which we are still in process of finalizing the rules. Again, the Oregon Health Authority should publish a first draft of those remaining rules in the next 2 months or so.
Great, thank you. And I think I maybe heard you offer to send us a link.
Absolutely.
To some of those rules. I would love that. Thank you so much. And then a question about, you showed a map of Oregon on your last slide there. And it said that support was broad and statewide. And I'm just curious if I was misreading it, because it looks like, if I'm reading it right, there's a bunch of counties on the east side that are all purple. And I don't know if I got the colors right, but it looks like that was 60% no. So,
yeah, I'm just going to pull it back up here.
Sure.
Broad in terms of numbers, not necessarily in terms of the visual geographic region. But I will say that just under, I think we were one county away from half of all counties being in a majority support for this program. And again, I think in Benton County, there's no question about the broad support being 63% of all residents supporting Measure 109.
Sure, thank you for clarifying that. I just think it's maybe not fair to say that it was statewide if 15 counties said no, but I do see that it passed by a majority, so thank you. Other questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Malone?
Yeah. I appreciate the thoughtful approach and implementation. Is there any model that you're following, or is Oregon trailblazing in this effort?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. So there have absolutely been clinical studies that have been going on for this type of for psilocybin for decades, actually. This will be the first state model. And again, that is why we took our responsibility as the first state to move forward so seriously. It's why we gave ourselves 2 years. It's why the advisory board is composed of a lot of medical experts in addition to community members and others. And we really believe that, you know, it's all eyes on Oregon here. And so that's why the foundation of this program is truly based on safety and access. You know, there's a lot of folks out there who are suffering that the current available options are simply not working for it. Measure 109 does not pretend to be a panacea. Psilocybin therapy is not for everyone, but we do feel strongly that it could work for some people. There's a lot of veterans out there and terminally ill cancer patients, for example, that I work with on a regular basis that really, can put the face to someone who has benefited significantly from having access to psilocybin therapy, either through clinical trials themselves or having to leave the country. That is one of the reasons why we feel strongly about being able to provide access locally to Oregonians, is to start to reduce the costs and create access for those in which psilocybin therapy might be a good fit.
Okay, thank you. And I look forward to what staff has to say about some of these details.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Not at this time. All right, well then at this point, I'd like to invite our staff to share any comments or ask questions if they might have. Let's see, we have invited Sheriff Jeff Van Arsdal, Suzanne Hoffman, and our Community Development Department Director to comment. So I see Sheriff, you clicked on. Do you have any comments or questions you'd like to share?
First, I'd like to thank you, Commissioner. You asked a question about the broad statewide support, and I also was going to ask that very question, so thank you. One thing you mentioned, Sam, was certifying the end of a session. This is essentially up to a 15-hour product. How does one go about certifying the end of a session?
That's a good question. Thank you, Sheriff. I'm not sure I would agree that it's a 16-hour session. They can be long, 6 to 8, I think is probably on the longer end of these sessions. The certification of the session is certainly something that is going to be determined between the facilitator and the service center themselves. And so that's something that we're going to see in the final rules that will be adopted. And I think that it's going to be, something that's going to be entirely important to ensure that we have a certification of the end of the session. I think that there's some tricky aspects there that you're alluding to that are being in process of being worked out right now. And I think the Oregon Health Authority, again, at the end of the day, is going to center the safety of the participant and the facilitators in determining what those final rules will be.
And then I guess my other question would just be, for lack of a better term, the safety plan. I appreciate that there's got to be a driver. There has to be some things. What are the consequences if somebody says, nope, I'm out, and they just leave the facility after they've had the treatment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think at that point, there's going to be part of the safety plan that determines where, I think people are may very well have to sign off on, being willing to be under a hold of some kind. Should they be in the rare case in which someone decides, that they want to leave the facility, there's going to be protocols and a plan for that built into the safety plan.
Great. Thank you, Sam.
Great, thank you. Suzanne Hoffman, do you have any questions or comments?
Just a brief statement, and then I would like to invite Mara Sargent, who's a policy analyst with Healthy Communities Division, and Ashley Talamonte is a co-interim behavioral health director, to please join in if you have a question or a comment, since I know you have expertise, if not specifically, generally around the subject matter. I would say, I guess, from my perspective, I've known this is coming for quite some time, because I remember when the measure passed, and I know from experience that from an administrative perspective, that the rule establishment process, the advisory board process, and all of those components took a great deal more time than they typically do. And these are typically not fast processes under the best of circumstances. So it does tell me that there's been a lot of due diligence and thoughtfulness behind the implementation. I have heard some of the anecdotal stories that helped to get the measure passed, and that were probably taken into consideration, I'm imagining, during implementation, that you mentioned, Sam, around veterans who have benefited from this type of treatment, who had tried everything else and wasn't working for them. and who've become spokespeople for this to be more available to other veterans and other individuals experiencing those kinds of issues. I hadn't heard about the successful use with late stage cancer patients, but am heartened to hear that. So I guess just from a level of preparedness, I'm optimistic about what I'm hearing, combined with the support in Benton County for the measure to begin with also. But again, from a more behavioral health treatment and mental health policy perspective, if Ashley or Mara, if you have any questions or concerns that you would want to register, I would invite you to do so now.
I think my main question just has to relates to the population that we serve. A lot of our individuals that are under our care are diagnosed with severe and persistent mental illness, a good sum of which have symptoms that are related to schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. So they, in other words, they have psychotic disorders. Has there been any long-term studies or research about how this treatment could potentially benefit or be counterindicated for that population?
Ashley, it's an incredibly good question. The research on either end of that spectrum in terms of potentially dangerous or beneficial is incredibly shallow, if not somewhat non-existent on that front. And I think that is one of the reasons why there is depth to that 4-step process, especially in the first 2 steps, where people will be required to attest to what their health and background is, right? And so, it is an informed consent model. We are not requiring a diagnosis here. And that's new, right? That's what makes it a little bit of a nuance compared to the traditional medical model. And, that recognizes that Measure 109 is creating a new path. Measure 109 says just because you've got 30 years in the emergency room does not necessarily mean you know how psilocybin works. And on the other end, just because you've been doing good underground work for 30 years and you're with your own community and you've seen great success does not mean that you are ready to provide professional services to the general public. Measure 109 really creates a spectrum that allows for all of those participants to come through a licensed, regulated, and supervised environment to where we can maximize safety and access simultaneously. Obviously, out of the gate, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. And in my opinion, if it's better to be on the cautious side than blow the doors open. And we're in the process of really laying that foundation. And I'm confident that with the protocols we'll be having, where people need to attest to their background, where facilitators will have, their license, potentially in liability should they be working with people that are outside their scope of practice. I could not count on both of my hands how many hours the board and the subcommittees have discussed scope of practice. There have been dozens of licensed mental health care professionals, from psychologists to therapists to social workers, that have expressed their concern about facilitators working outside of their scope. That's a concern that we also have. And that's why the rules have been built to really emphasize what this is, which is a therapeutic modality, and what it is not. This is not talk therapy. This is not something where a facilitator is going to be talking someone through this experience. This is really where a facilitator is going to be trained in the safety and in the event in which there is an adverse reaction, where someone's nauseous or someone breaks down and is crying profusely, right? These are the type of situations these people are trained for. And that's exactly the focus on the safety that is paramount to ensure that this program is successful.
And I think my only other question, and just thinking about who would be able to access this program, what is not necessarily the payment model, but are insurances looking to offset the cost for participants? Is it an out-of-pocket situation? And I'm also just curious about how it works with federally funded insurances, because there's always that competing what states are allowing, and sometimes the federal payment model, won't contribute to, the funding of such. So I guess I'm just curious about how consumers would be paying for it.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Unfortunately, we do not envision or see insurance providers covering the cost of the psilocybin administration session itself anytime soon. That is simply a fact due to its unfortunate still being a Schedule I nature that prohibits insurance companies from touching it. We do believe that right now, over the next couple of years, there will be a lot of privately philanthropic funded type of community-based models, right? That's something that the Healing Advocacy Fund is very focused on doing. Right now, the current phase is helping make sure we build an infrastructure that is workable and accessible and safe. The second is supporting the licensees and the actors who then will make up that infrastructure to make sure they have the training and the resources they need to provide the services to the clients. And then last but not least is ensuring that clients can reasonably actually access this. I'll be the first to say that if it's just a bunch of wealthy white people from out of the state of Oregon, this program will have been a failure. And that is something that we are incredibly attuned to. And so I think that out of the gate, we've got a lot of work to do to continue to make this as affordable and accessible as possible. And we're just getting started.
Thank you. And thanks for coming today and sharing what you shared. It's a lot of new information. I appreciate it.
Hi, Sam. This is Mara Sargent. I'm a policy analyst in the Public Health Department of Benton County. And my background is in substance abuse prevention. So my question is about the facilitators. The word I keep hearing you use is facilitator. And I'm wondering specifically what the facilitators' backgrounds are required to be in. Are these licensed mental health professionals? And at what level are they licensed mental health professionals? Are these anyone who can take a 6-week course to become a psilocybin facilitator? And how are we, as a secondary, how are we providing, who is providing the training in order for someone to become a psilocybin facilitator? And is that privatized to the facilities as well? Or is this something like Oregon State University or Portland State or one of our educational facilities is going to be able to gain benefits from as well?
All right, those are a lot of really good questions, Mara. Let me see if I can hit them in the order that you asked them. To the first question, there are far more licensed healthcare professionals than I actually anticipated interested in providing these services. Many of them are treatment facilities now, from doctors to therapists to social workers to first responders. There's a whole host of currently licensed professionals that want to add psilocybin therapy to their ability in terms of making these services available to their existing networks. With that said, again, there is not a requirement that you be a licensed healthcare professional. Why? For the exact same reason that I said before. Just because you have formal training does not necessarily mean it included psilocybin, and just because you're very familiar with psilocybin does not mean you're ready to provide services to the general public, right? That is really where the training programs themselves, of many of which are in the process of or that have been approved by the Oregon Health Authority, will be diving into all of these subjects. Now, there's a total of 160 hours that are required for facilitators to go through that then need to be certified, or that need to graduate their training program, and then they need to get the license from the Oregon Health Authority, and there'll be a second test for that as well. So that within that 160 hours also includes 40 hours of practicum. So there's going to be hands-on experience that is also required in that training itself. Remind me what your second question was.
Oh, I was asking about actual training process itself is privatized, like done by OHA or by the training facilities, or if it's something that can be opened up and the benefits can be reaped by the our public and private universities or other educational centers in the state.
Yeah, really good question. It is not privatized. So individual training programs can come up with their own curriculum, many of which are focusing on specific populations. For example, there is the ALMA Institute that has recently been certified by the Oregon Health Authority. They really focus on identifying members of the BIPOC and LGBTQA plus community to be able to train facilitators from that community to serve that community. Right? There's other training programs that are focusing specifically on end-of-life care. A lot of them are palliative care and hospice medical directors, for example, right? That community has different needs in different ways. And so while there is still a foundation and a minimum requirement of 160 hours, many of these training programs will go far above and beyond that because the communities that they are serving have additional needs and additional considerations that they want to make sure that they not only meet, but they exceed as well.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, any other questions from the Health Department or Public Health? All right, then up we have our Community Development Director, Darren Nichols.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for spending some time with us and being willing to answer questions. I appreciate it. I'm just going to share a couple of thoughts from the statewide roundtable of county planning directors. So folks met last week and kind of shared observations, questions, thoughts, concerns, and kind of as a way of learning from one another. I guess the takeaway here is there's a lot of uncertainty about how and where these activities will unfold. And so I appreciate you being willing to kind of talk those through with us. Among the issues that were raised, you've touched on a couple of these already, so I appreciate that, but the transportation impact, I think, is one of the questions that we want to think about. And that's mainly going to be driven by the size of the facility and the number of patients. There's always a question among planners about conflicting uses. How does a proposed use in a rural area especially fit in with the surrounding uses and neighbors? One of the biggest questions that was raised is just uncertainty about the needs of the industry. So because this is new and none of us have examples to look to, I think it's unclear yet what a successful business model would look like and whether there's a scale of operations or a scale of economy that fits. I mentioned the number of patients. There's also some questions about whether these would be indoor treatment sessions or outdoor treatment sessions, or perhaps a combination of both. Whether overnight accommodations either need to be or could be part of the consideration. And then following on the overnight question, there's a few other questions about other services. So food services or other kinds of support activities that would need to be part of that. You may also be able to talk a little bit about the difference between growing, selling, and administering or facilitating. And I think there's questions about all of those. And you've touched on a little bit regarding on-site safety and the fact that there won't be advertising and there won't be sales, off-site. So I appreciate that. And then just leave with an example for the board to consider. I haven't seen the site plans for this, although I understand they're available, but apparently a Dutch company has already has an option on a 125-acre facility in Southern Oregon that would create a resort type kind of yurts and camping in the outdoors facility for treatment. And so those examples and those kind of stories, whether they're true or not, or how legitimate they are, I think are part of what has us as planners and community development professionals asking, what will these look like, and how do they fit? How do they really fit into our communities? The last thing I'll leave the board with is just, state the obvious, counties are all over the map in terms of how they're approaching this. So I have been kind of watching others and hoping to give you some kind of consensus. And I don't really see a consensus because of the level of uncertainty. So I think we're curious, we're open to learn, but we want to go in with our eyes open and really kind of think this through and learn with you. So if I can answer questions, I'll certainly do that. Otherwise, any reactions from our guest, I think.
I have a couple of questions when it comes to siting. This is a statewide created program, and people will, if they have a proposal for a facilitation location, will come to us with a land use compatibility statement request, a LUX. Can we stipulate that this is a conditional use and go one step beyond that?
Good question. So I think, if we were to receive a LUX this afternoon, we would review it under our current code. And I don't have a straight answer for you, Commissioner Rochereau, on how we would do that. I think a lot of these questions are questions that we would ask. How we would actually handle it, I don't know. And so it depends a little bit on whether you consider it an agricultural use, healthcare use, an industrial use. There's some definitions that we need to prove.
Yeah, for sure. And I can see the facility, a treatment facility, where the facilitation occurs being a healthcare facility, and potentially also have QMHPs on staff, so that the facilitator is not providing that talk therapy, but there might be someone else there that does. So that's one type of facility. And then there's the manufacturer, which is a different story. A dark shed with a controlled environment. So I guess what I'm wanting to know is if we can take the conditional use approach, because that gives us a little bit more leverage. But then we would have to write code in order to do that, correct? And we could conceivably receive requests for land use, the LUX, as early as January. So that's where I think some of the counties are choosing to put moratoria in place so that they have a little bit more of their own house in order before they start receiving requests for land use approval.
I think that's right. I don't want to interpret counties' decisions, but my sense is that most of the ones who are putting a moratorium in place, it's to give them time to kind of figure these things out. The one county that seems to be the most advanced in their thinking around this is Deschutes County. They've taken a leadership role and are sharing their information, draft ordinances and that. They've created kind of a compromise position, which is to allow production and manufacturing in the EFU zone or in resource zones with a conditional use permit process in place to vet the proposal. And then the service centers themselves, I think that I'm using the terminology correctly, the service centers are where the facilitators would be administering this therapy. Those would be allowed in rural industrial and in rural communities and in rural service centers. Those are all land use terms. So less resource intensive, less natural resource intensive, more development intensive locations. The interesting thing about these, and from a land use perspective, we don't see this very often. These are not allowed inside urban growth boundaries, which means they have to happen outside of urban growth boundaries. And I haven't taken the time, so I apologize for speaking off the cuff for just a minute, but it puts an interesting kind of inverse dynamic where we're talking about, a fairly intensive, what would ordinarily be an urban clinic type use, required to be outside of urban growth boundaries. So
for the county perspective, but for, say, the city of Corvallis, they can't be allowed in residentially zoned areas, but they could be allowed in general industrial or in other or commercial zones for a city.
I think there's a legal question around that that's still to be answered from what I'm hearing.
Sam, do you have a comment on that?
First thing I'll say, I'm not an attorney and this is not legal advice. The second thing I'll ask is, could you pose the question, please?
Yeah, go ahead, Darren.
So I'll just state what I think the question is, the legal question is, are service centers required to be located outside of a residential zone and outside of an urban growth boundary? So that seems to be a consistent interpretation of the measure.
So they cannot be allowed within city limits. Is that?
Doesn't make sense.
That's a separate question that I'm also happy to speak to, because there's one word in section 26 and it's the word "and" that gets everyone confused about the city county distinction.
Yeah,
that's right.
Let me speak to the urban growth boundary question first. This is the first I have ever heard of anything not being permitted in an urban growth boundary. I'm fairly confident that if we were to do a Control F search of Measure 109 right now, you would not find those words in the statute. So that does not mean that that's not a potentially valid interpretation when you get down to local control. So I'll stop short of weighing in on that, but I'm fairly confident that the urban growth boundary is not something that is explicitly prohibited or allowed under Measure 109. I do not believe Measure 109 speaks to urban growth boundary.
And then service centers within cities.
Right, yeah, so there's section 26 is one of the sections in Measure 109 that speaks to local government land use control, and specifically says it's kind of just like a overly legalese drafting line, essentially, that makes it seem as though service centers could not be located within cities. That is not the case. I can't remember exactly how the language reads, but it's something along the lines of, the first line is, service centers may not be located inside in the boundary of a city, comma, and next line, in a residentially zoned area.
Yeah.
I've talked to at least a dozen planners who got very confused because it's written poorly, that they think it's just not allowed in a city. And I say, no, I hear you, I get it. That word "and" is probably the biggest, smallest word in the entire measure as it relates to local control, and is easily skipped over. So that's the clarity on that.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. All right, other comments or questions? Sorry, Sam, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna speak to a couple of the things that I jotted down here in terms of what these facilities are going to look like, if that would be helpful.
Sure.
Okay. So I do think that there's going to be a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, as was mentioned here, which I think is going to be fewer than more, there will be resort retreat style facilities, right? These are going to be far more expensive, overhead intensive than anything else, but they will offer not just psilocybin sessions, but yoga, meditation, etc. There may be, very well overnight lodging involved, which there may be involved in other models as well. But that's going to be one of the rarer models just because it's capital intensive. And frankly, this is not a business that people are rushing into to become a millionaire. They certainly will not. Anyone who works in existing mental health care will be able to acknowledge that fact, that if you can make it out of the red and into the black, you're probably doing pretty good and you're helping people at the same time. So that's the other thing that I'll mention about this is, those more expensive retreats are going to be fewer than more, I think. And that's really the only example that I know of a facility of that size. So the other end of the spectrum is actually going to be the medical institution. This is going to happen at treatment centers. It's going to happen at hospitals. It's going to happen in hospice and palliative care settings where we have a population, often the population that has a complex history of existing mental health conditions that really need that environment in which some of them literally live, not to be taken away. They simply want to add psilocybin therapy to the existing environment because they see the promise that it holds. And so this is literally going to be white light, stethoscope, lab coat doctors that will be working with some of these patients. The most common model will be in the middle. No bells and whistles, comfortable environment, therapist office style, right? That is where I think the sweet spot is for a lot of these folks. They don't need to go buy or lease a new building. They have trained, they have a whole staff, some of which may be very interested in expanding their portfolio and to include psilocybin services. And I think that is where the majority of these businesses are going to land, is in current, utilized office space that a therapist or a social worker might have. And I think in that consideration, let's say that's probably going to be 80 to 90% of what these businesses will look like is therapist office. I think there was a really good question about transportation. I imagine that when we talk about transportation, we're talking about parking and ratios in terms of how many people will be going to the businesses. And I think that's a land use decision that y'all get to make, and we can help inform. And I would encourage, should the commissioners decide to work with the community who is interested in having this, they'll be able to provide a lot of these answers. I can tell you that, there's probably not going to be more than 5 or 6 sessions going on at one time. I mean, that's going to require a handload of staff on its own, and it's not retail. So the coming and going is not at nearly at the same rate as you would see for a retail business of some kind.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
Commissioner Wise, I do have just a comment to engage the board a little bit further in conversation on this topic. What I'm looking for is, what are the board's interests and intentions around this topic? We've heard a wide range of information this morning. I've heard the word moratorium. We know that there's other possibilities of potentially opting out. I'm just trying to take a litmus test, if you will, of the board, where you're at in your interests.
Sure, Commissioner
I, given the strong support for the Measure 109 in Benton County, I'm supportive of the program overall and its intent and its potential for therapeutic assistance for a broad range of folks in need. But I also think that we need to have our own ducks in a row here in Benton County, and we have a lot on our plates in community development. So my biggest question, frankly, is staff capacity and what can we do reasonably, and do we want to be hit with applications in January, or do we need to take some more time? So it's a staff capacity question for me.
I don't know if we have a response to that, or if that's something we want to think about.
Actually, I think a very legitimate concern, especially when you look at the other agenda item later on in this morning's agenda, which is a huge undertaking for Benton County, especially in our community development department. So in response to Commissioner Ogero's comment, without consulting with Darren, I do have concerns about our staff capacity. There's also the ability to outsource, if you will, if we need to bring additional expertise and or additional resources. But I definitely have a concern about staff capacity based on our landfill discussion that we'll be having shortly.
Sure. And I agree with much of what Commissioner Ojero has said. I would describe my support as neutral at this point. I've heard lots of support for it. But again, it is important that we get our ducks in a row and consider possible impacts to our community. We have gone over time for this agenda topic, and it is a lot of information to digest. So I suggest maybe we could bring it back to a goal setting meeting, or if that would be appropriate, if commissioners would like that.
Yeah, I have similar comments and concerns. I mean, our voters have supported those measures fairly strongly. And I agree we should proceed, but would temper that with just community development concerns. And if you feel like you need more time to research this and talk to the other counties, and I would be amenable to a delay in the county implementing this measure.
So do you want to talk about it more at a future goal
Yes.
setting meeting? Okay.
Well, especially with getting more feedback from the community development folks.
Sure.
Commissioner Oger, can I say one final comment related to staff capacity and the process?
Yes, please.
So I just want to be clear on what the process is for everyone here in terms of your options. Your options, I think, are generally threefold. The first is you could put a temporary ban on these businesses. And the process for that is to vote and then send it to the voters. I do not anticipate there's a good chance that it would pass, given how voters already decided on this. In the event in which you were to send it to voters, it would fail, and you do not have time, place, and manner regulations. January 2nd, you will receive luxes, and the OHA, will issue licenses. So, in terms of staff capacity, it will take staff capacity and time to put that on the ballot as well. Significant staff capacity, from what I understand. And so, I would just heavily encourage you to, if you do go that route, which I personally hope that you don't. But if you do, drafting time, place, and manner simultaneously, I think would actually save staff capacity, allow them to work with community members who can help continue to answer some of those gaps, as opposed to sending it to the ballot, it failing, and then not having done the legwork up front to be prepared for people to apply for licenses. So I just wanted to include those final tidbits of information in terms of the process and what it might mean for staff capacity, as I very much understand and appreciate folks' capacity being incredibly limited with all the things going on right now. So thank you for the additional time.
Thank you, Sam. We appreciate you bringing up those good points for our consideration. And I think that's exactly why we should continue the conversation at another time. So I think.
Mr. Wise, we'd be happy to put it on the August 9th goal setting, if that's of interest to the board.
I will not be present, but
Okay.
Okay, well, we can figure it out. Yep.
Postpone it to a later date as well.
I don't want to delay, because my sense is that, short of a moratorium, which we would have to put on the ballot, and that's an August 8th deadline, I believe, for the general election. 19 or 18, a little bit later. A little bit later, okay, but it's coming right up. Short of that, we really do need to have some sort of time, place, and manner if we're going code in place, and if we're going to require conditional use and have an opportunity to really look at these land use applications in a more consistent way.
Yes. And I'll share too, for the record, my neutrality is not based off of any, it's just my personality. We were presented with a bunch of information here today, and I need time to process it. And, we need more time to discuss it.
Question for you, Darren. Say after the first of the year, you get an application. I assume that the clock starts ticking, and you have how long to process it?
We typically have 150 days to make a final decision on any land use application. So depending on the type of application, we'd have roughly 5 months. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Sam, thank you very much for coming today. I really appreciate it. I just have to say, I feel like this was a very good conversation. I think our staff asked lots of really good questions, lots of good food for thought, and I am just really impressed by how great our Benton County staff is. And with that, I will call for a 5-minute break. So we will come back at 10:11. Again. And next up on the agenda is the consent calendar. And we have a series of meeting minutes on there. I did not find any typos. I would entertain a motion to approve or approve changes. Second. All those in favor say aye. 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 Motion carries. Next up on the agenda, 6.1, discussion and action, Benton County Solid Waste Situational Assessment Draft Project Scoping. And we have with us, again, our Community Development Director, Darren Nichols. Sure.
Thank you, Chair Wise. For the invitation to come to visit. Special thanks to County Council for recommending to come back this week. I see that Vance has now checked out of the conversation and will leave us on our own. So in all seriousness, thank you very much for having us back. This is an important conversation, and it's a timely conversation that we want to continue the momentum that we've invested in. I've invited Daniel Reddick, our solid waste program coordinator, and Greg Ferret, our deputy director, to join me this morning in case you have questions. I would underscore one thing about where we are at the moment. This is very much a conversation in progress or work in progress. So you'll see in front of you, I hope a two-page addendum to our thinking. And this is literally hot off the press this morning. We're kind of trying to scramble to get some numbers in front of you so that you have at least a rough sense for what it would take to advance the different components of implementing the situational assessment that you all heard and the recommendations that you heard from Sam Imparati last week. So, so what you have in front of you is an implementation plan that lays out really the work steps, the work tasks recommended in the situational assessment, but in more of a project management kind of format. So you'll see there's a task and then a responsible party and then a deadline. We did this, Daniel, special thanks to Daniel for pulling this together and putting it in this format so that we could just kind of understand what the work would look like and when it might be due. We certainly would welcome any thoughts on the specifics or questions on the specific kind of tasks. But I think what we're looking for from the board today is that kind of feedback and also just an overall, is this what you expected? Are we in the ballpark at all? And I might just add that we didn't miss the task, but it's kind of further down in the implementation plan. But one of the first things is to develop the common understandings document that Sam recommended. It's not staff's responsibility to finalize that, but we should at least begin drafting that so that the work group has something to kind of get their hands on right away. So if that one amendment to the implementation plan, I would say task 0.1 should be to develop common understandings draft, and then also find a place to put that. And I'm really thankful to Daniel for developing a website that is actually ready to publish. And Daniel has also assembled a library of existing documents. So we have quite a bit of work that's kind of ready to launch if and when you're ready. And then the third piece, which Daniel has also already started working on, is that common understandings document. So I think that's probably enough on the implementation plan. I do want to turn just briefly to the addendum that we put in front of you this morning. And for those of you that are following online, I emailed a copy of this to Erica, and I presume that through the magic of modern technology, we can make that available to folks to look at.
Put it in the chat. Or yeah, or can we screen share it?
I did. I thought I did. While Erica is pulling that up, just know that it's available, but it is again very much a work in progress. This is kind of our best thinking to date. And before we get into the numbers, I might just mention that there are 4 components to it. There's a facilitation component. There is for the work group itself. Then there is a 2-part conditional use application component. So anticipating that we at some point will see a revised conditional use application. There are a land use review and a legal review. Those are both anticipated to be done by outside staff, external staff. And then the piece that I'm missing, apologize, is for the actual technical expertise to conduct the management plan, which would come after the work group finishes its charge. So
The other piece is the solid waste management plan expertise, correct?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And that would happen. So that would happen after the work group has finished its charge. We would be seeking for those professionals to help us, but that actual work of developing the management plan, we anticipate would happen at some point
After December.
after the work group has established the process and gotten to some level of consensus and presented some observations to you all. Right, so these estimates that are in front of you this morning do not include internal staff times, it's just the external component. So it's really the kind of the dollars and cents impact. We have obviously a recent example, the conditional use permit review to pull from. That took time. It took time from several of us. Probably the bulk of that landed on Inga Williams and Daniel Reddick, but there was also substantial portions of Greg's time, Linda Ray, our administrative specialist, and a little bit of mine as well. So we have not taken the time to kind of recap what we think that would have been. I think Daniel estimated that probably 400 hours of his time. And I would say probably another 400 of the rest of our time collectively. So in rough terms, 0.4, 0.5 of an FTE for the next year. So yeah, that's our thinking today. We relied heavily on some recent similar efforts at Deschutes County, Marion County, and Lane County. And I want to say a special thanks to our colleagues at those 3 counties for sharing information and lessons learned. While a Benton County process will need to be a Benton County process, and it will need to be kind of our own specific tailored process, it was really instructive to see how other counties have approached similar types of solid waste plans, and also to get a sense from them what the budget has looked like in other counties. Okay. So I think that's, we ought to stop there and open it to questions because you've had a chance to look at this, at least part of it.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So the first question you asked is this what you expected? And I will just speak for myself when I say that this exceeded my expectations. And I have no idea how you all did this so fast. So thank you. Other comments or questions?
Yeah, a similar comment. This is an impressive level of detail and a pretty good map going forward on the external costs that are outlined in the 2-pager here. Is any of that included in the current budget or coins in the couch, or what's the plan going forward on if we go forward on this one?
Yeah, so thank you, Commissioner Malone. I think it would be the coins in the couch, at least from my perspective. It's not in the current, it's not in our current community development budget. We're staffed up to review applications that come in, but this is substantial planning effort that would be in addition to our current budget. Obviously, we have Daniel on staff, so,
Yeah.
and he's been doing some of this work, and I should have mentioned that there is a bit of a question mark in the fiscal impact, depending on how much of Daniel's existing work we can utilize, which we would certainly seek to do if it is your wishes and the wish of the work group. But we don't have the budget to take this on currently.
I wanted to say that it's not in the budget, but on the other hand, with the revenue that comes in from Republic Services based on our existing landfill franchise, we budgeted at a cautious level because we didn't know exactly where that franchise was going to come out, and we have more money coming in than we had budgeted for. So there is certainly funding that could be budgeted for this activity, and that would very appropriately be budgeted for this activity.
Yeah, that's right. And so I should be more clear. I don't know that there's not money. I just know there's not money in my budget currently.
Right. We didn't.
That was my question.
Right, we didn't.
You did answer.
Commissioner,
Thank
can I interject
Sure.
real quick? Darren, thanks for your feedback. Darren and Rick and I have had a number of email conversations over the last couple of weeks, and this is certainly an unanticipated expense, and it's a significant unanticipated expense. When you add all of these projected figures up and you round up, it's about $500,000, frankly.
Yep.
And so I do think that what we'll need to do is work with Rick Prager, our Chief Financial Officer, and identify exactly where this can come from. I think the good news is that based on where we're at in the current biennium regarding spending of our budget, I think we definitely have savings in terms of money that has not been spent that we were anticipating it would be. That might be the money that Commissioner Oger is referring to, or it might come from somewhere else. And so I think we can put Rick on the spot right now, and he can provide maybe a little bit more specificity if the commissioners would like.
Do you feel like you have anything to add at this time, Rick, or?
Thanks, Commissioner Wise, members of the board. I don't have a whole lot to add other than exactly what Commissioner Oger said. I mean, certainly the Republic Service landfill contract is leveraging, I know this leveraging more than what we had budgeted for. That obviously all goes into the general fund component. The early, and as I indicated to the commissioners last week during our meeting, we are trending much higher than we were forecasting from a general fund standpoint. So to Joe's point, yes, we would be positioned, but at the same time, as you know, there are a lot of other things in the county that we're currently doing related to salaries, related to JSEP, that we'll have to analyze as a bulk to make sure that we understand how best to afford that. So that's all I had. Unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Rick? I'll just, go ahead.
Not for Rick.
Okay. Yeah, I will just share that. Yeah, I looked at this just now and I'm having some sticker shock. I don't mean for that to get in the way of my excitement of this plan. Those are just some big, the numbers just add up to a lot. So go ahead, Pat.
Seems like we have several of these issues that maybe should have been done or started already. I assume the recommendation is that this is what we need to do, and that is a question.
Thank you for asking. That's the recommendation. So this is taking Sam's recommendations and kind of putting those into a very preliminary project management scope and budget, and asking you, what do you think about this? So for comparative terms, Sam has invested, we've invested about $25,000 in Sam's initial situational assessment. My understanding from Oregon Consensus and from Sam himself is that he actually spent a lot more time than the budget indicated in order to kind of get a good sense for what's happening here and how to advise us. So, but to put it in perspective, between now and the end of the year, 8 meetings with a work group And kind of the tasks that you see here would be more than double that just for the facilitation piece of it. So it's a substantial investment. I don't want to leave you with the impression that this isn't a big investment. On the other hand, it's about 10% of a single year's revenue from the landfill. So if you think about it in those terms, it doesn't seem like that big of investment. I say, all things being equal. Probably the biggest question mark here is in that second item, the materials management plan, technical expertise. Daniel is skilled in this space and he has done a lot of this work. The question I think that's open for us is how much of Daniel's work could be utilized by an outside consultant that could possibly save us some dollars here. And that is a question that we would only know after we've gone through some kind of an RFQ or RFP process and given those outside experts a chance to look at what we already have and determine how they could use it. So going back to the schedule, the kind of task list spreadsheet, you'll see that the first three tasks, 1.1, 1.2, and 1.2, are to select and contract with a work group facilitator. So that's the first budget item that you've looked at. And then the next two are to determine the RFP processes and draft scopes of work for the land use and legal review, and then also for the sustainable materials management planning. I would say if you feel comfortable proceeding to the next step, we should give ourselves the time and space to get those RFPs out on the street, get some reactions, and begin exploring kind of the art of the possible with some skilled outside expertise.
I would like to comment that what I would most like from that outside expertise is the ability to focus on environmental impacts of the landfill, the greenhouse gas emissions component, the any other potential environmental impacts. We know that the water quality issues are monitored. Is that it's monitored to DEQ standards? Is it adequate? Are we missing anything? Is there anything over and above that we should be looking at? Are there any particulate matter issues that we should be concerned about? I don't know. I'm just, those are the things that I would like to have some sort of an outside expert in landfills be able to comment on so that we know more about what we should be looking at with respect to environmental impacts now and in future.
Thank you, Commissioner Osro. When you say environmental impacts, I think you're speaking to both the conditional use permit process and the sustainable materials management planning.
Definitely to the sustainable materials management plan. And then yes, if we're looking at applying criteria to landfill expansion, I would want them to be informed by some understanding of impacts. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments or questions?
Yeah, just I really appreciate the work that has gone into this. We keep batting around. I think there were 3 questions that Sam identified, and it would be wonderful to get those answers so we don't have to bat them around in the future, so that we have solid facts to move forward on. Just to show that I can do details sometimes on the handout, number 2, second line, it says work undertaken by Oregon counties. Should that be consensus?
Thank you. For number 1, that certainly is Oregon consensus. For number 2, that bullet point actually does lay out work undertaken by the 3 counties below. So I think it should be counties.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you. And appreciate that we've got good cooperation from our neighboring counties sharing what they had, what they've learned, and help us define the scope of work and obviously some of the costs involved. So let them know we appreciate sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Malone. I just want to underscore the appreciation. Daniel and I reached out to Deschutes County, Marion County, and Lane County, and the response back has been really incredibly helpful. Deschutes County actually offered us samples of their RFPs and solicitation materials. They didn't hesitate to share, and it's a privilege to work with public servants in Oregon, and I think especially because we do work really well together.
Well, and they've made the investment and are further ahead in the process, and that really helps us. So
Yes.
Let them know we appreciate that. And when I see other commissioners from those counties, I will pass that along.
Thank you. Commissioner Ojo, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to dig in a little bit more on the proposed plan, and it's a very ambitious schedule. Got to say that right up front. And we need to move quickly in order to get the work done by that December timeframe, which we've been discussing all along. I wanted to comment on the fact that the meeting schedule, 8 meetings from August through December, and the 4-hour meetings was something that the public commenters spoke to earlier. It is a significant investment of time. I agree with the kind of the scope and nature of the folks that I would want to have at this table. I think it's ambitious given that time request, and we may have to scale it back and think about how people can maybe wear multiple hats in order to be able to get people that will be consistently participating through the process, because this kind of a process will not work if we have people popping in and out. And so that's something that we just have to be really cognizant of as we choose participants. They have to be committed. And yes, they can take vacations, but we can't have people popping in and out.
Sure. And then can you refresh my memory? I know in here somewhere it lists the Board of Commissioners is responsible for appointing some members. Is that correct? And then other groups?
Yeah,
well.
thank you, Chair Wise. The board would select the work group members based on basically statements of volunteer interest, but I think also to Commissioner Ogero's point, we would need to require some level of commitment from participants to show up and attend and be present. One of the nice things about working with the facilitator that we have worked with and anybody else at Oregon Consensus is they have skills, experience, and tools to encourage robust participation among work groups like this. So I feel good about having it in the hands of a third party facilitator.
Follow up or
a little bit of follow up in that sense. One of the other contributors to the landfill was one of the parties that we are definitely interested in, whether it's counties or cities. And I was thinking that maybe it would be beneficial to consult with the Council of Governments and see whether there's a staff person at the Council of Governments that could participate on behalf of the cities, at least in Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln. That would provide a broader perspective than just one city. And I really like the suggestion at one point of using ORA, the Oregon Recycling, and I can't remember what ORA stands for, and Reduction of Association.
Refuse and Recycling
Refuse and
Association.
Recycling, thank you. Using ORA as a resource. We did receive public comment about having Republic at the table. I think that Republic should be at the table, but perhaps in an ex officio position. Maybe ORA would be a better representative with a voting voice. I don't know, but I think that that's worth considering too.
Sure. And so the recommendations from this body of work here came from the document that Sam provided us. Is that correct? And so
Yes.
I think, okay. So would you be wanting to change some of Sam's
No,
recommendations?
Sam
or-
in his report suggested that perhaps Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association was the appropriate body. Okay. And so it's in the recommendations. It was not in the report that Daniel drafted for us to consider today.
Got it.
But it's just one of those things I think we need to be aware of as we choose participants. And I recognize that we're not doing that today, but.
Sure, thank you for that
Yeah.
clarification. Other comments or questions?
Chairwise, I did have 3 comments that I'd
Yes,
like to
please.
just share real quick. Darren, I think one of the important things as I look at the makeup is I think it'd be valuable to have one of our sustainability staff involved in this process. I do think that they have they'll have some good input to provide, but just as importantly, we'll be developing additional expertise on our own team through their involvement. That would be number 1. Number 2, to the point of time, the amount of time being asked of folks that are going to be participating. I also looked at the time of day. I think that could be an issue if you are planning on trying to have meetings during the course of the day. So I would just highlight, you may want to rethink the timing of the meetings. And then lastly, do you anticipate that we'll continue to work with SAM through Oregon Consensus, or will we be looking for someone else to take the baton from SAM at this point?
That's a really good question, Joe. Thank you for asking it. I would turn it back around and just ask if anyone, to see if we feel comfortable continuing to work with SAM. And if not, please do let me know. I've asked a few of you privately, and it sounds like people feel good about the work that SAM has done to date. One kind of little bit of nuance there is that if we were to turn around and go back out with a separate RFP for a facilitator, that would take us probably a full month, if not longer. And then the facilitator would have to get up to speed in the way that SAM has just spent the last 2 months doing. So I don't think we're backed into a corner, and I don't want to suggest that, but I do think that if you feel comfortable with the work that Sam is doing, he has built a tremendous amount of knowledge around this topic and relationships with the parties.
So unless there's more questions, or did you get through your questions?
Actually, that was it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I noticed on the timetable, there are a couple tasks, and the responsible party is BOC, and there are 2 deadlines that are today's date. And 4.1 work group membership, identify 2 neighboring jurisdictions to participate. And then 7.1, determine Benton County resources to be used on project implementation. Are we still wanting to try to get through that today, or?
Yeah, good question. So this is ambitious, there's no doubt. It would be helpful, and I think you've already given us some guidance. I heard Commissioner Ogerow say perhaps the COG could provide some representative capacity for.
No, I said the Council of Governments.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misheard. I thought it was legal.
No,
but that's an
it is an
option as well.
option.
Yeah.
But the Council of Governments represents more of the clients of Coffin Butte more directly. So
yes, I think that's a good idea. My concern is that they just seem to be overwhelmed lately.
I think
So-
that we just have to consult with Ryan and vote.
Sure, okay.
It's worth checking
into.
I can say from a county perspective, Commissioner Pope from Polk County has reached out to me with interest. And this was a couple months ago at this point. Polk County is definitely a big client, as are their cities of Coffin Butte. But just based on what we have learned in the discussions with other counties, I would say that someone from Marion County might be really good, because they have more of that expertise, because they're going through similar processes themselves, and their waste system relies in part on Coffin Butte. So I really like the idea of engaging someone from Marion County.
Okay, so far we have up the COG, Polk County, Marion County. There's Lynn County is right next to us, right across the river. I don't know, if we identify several partners.
Yeah.
Could you then reach out and see who is feasible to, you know, be able to participate?
Who has the time?
Yeah,
Yes.
and is willing.
Yeah.
Mhm. So rather than give you a hard of these two, we can just kind of, okay, perfect.
Yeah, I think that's what we were looking for, was any guidance on who you would like to see participate. And again, the outside jurisdictions are ex officio members, so it's
Yeah.
partly, it's a two-way dialogue, kind of opening the relationship. So letting them know what we're doing, but also getting feedback from them. I think those are both part of the intention here.
I did receive inquiries from Lincoln County as well, Commissioner Jacobson over there, because of course, this will also, whatever we do influences them.
And this, just to clarify, these will be public meetings, is that correct?
Yes, they will.
Okay, so anyone who wants to attend will be able to do that anyway, and just watch or learn.
Yeah, that's right. And so participation is really not limited to the work group, although we'll have an identified work group that will provide, you know, a more formal recommendation. We anticipate that there'll be lots of input from the public, which is not limited to Benton County or any one organization or
Yeah.
individual.
Okay, good. But I would anticipate that the meetings will have to be highly structured in order to get to the outputs for each meeting. So there will be, I think, probably formal voting processes and
Yes, which I
limited.
think is
time.
why there's a recommendation for the facilitator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Probably the reason for the facilitator is to
absolutely.
keep us all on track.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Okay, Commissioner Malone?
A clarifying question. It says 8 members of the public appointed by the BOC. And then there was some talk about ex officio members. Is that in addition to the 8?
In addition to the 8, yes, thank you.
Do you have a maximum number floating around in your head for the group?
Thank you for asking, Commissioner Malone. That's probably a really good question for the facilitator. You know, groups have kind of a marginal utility, kind of a maximum size. I would like to pose that to the facilitator once we have them on board.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Good question.
Commissioner Wise, you asked about the second task, and I don't want to forget that. In terms of the budget, I want to be transparent as we possibly can about what this is likely to look like. And I think, you know, for today's purposes, $500,000 is the way to think about it. I also want to be, we're not asking you to commit to $500,000. We're asking you to commit to the next steps. And then I think we should bring those back to you as soon as we have sufficient detail for you to think more carefully about this. So I'm also looking at Joe Kirby to make sure that's the right approach, because I'm suggesting spending money that's not in my budget, as we clarified earlier. But I do think if you're at least comfortable with what we've laid out to take the next step, which would be an RFP, RFQ, we will continue to explore this further and bring that back to you as we know, sharpen our pencils and know more about what the budget should look like.
Very good. Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate that. And I want to kind of apologize a little bit for my sticker shock. I mean, that's why I like to see stuff ahead of time, because I kind of sometimes have like a gut reaction, which I know you guys had an incredibly tight turnaround. So I'm just, and I do really thank you for being upfront and transparent with this. That's always better to know going in. So thank you for that. Other comments, questions?
Mr. Wise, I think we just need to speak clearly about the next steps regarding the facilitator, because we touched a little bit on that, and I saw the board shaking their heads regarding the possible use of Sam Imperati.
Yes, by shaking to me nodding yes.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And so can you please speak to that? Are we in agreement? Because that will certainly help expedite things if we don't have to go out for bid for that service.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a yes. Zan said yes.
Yeah, I was impressed with Sam and like you say, starting over would definitely delay the process, and pretty sure it would change the timeline. And I don't see any reason to do that. So continue with Sam Imperati.
And I noticed, so in the staff report, you requested candid feedback, clear direction and urgent support to maintain momentum. So I think we've given you some candid feedback. We've given you some clear direction. Are there other points you need direction on, or are we ready to make a motion?
Well, you probably should give us a deadline to work towards. So when would you like us to be back with the next report and update? I don't want to inundate you with solid waste, but I also don't want to kind of leave this conversation hanging.
We can take it. We can handle
Okay.
it.
Oh, I think that what do you need in order to go ahead and get facilitator contract in place so that we can proceed with the next steps? And you need us to direct you with the overall language that's in the proposed motion, or do you need anything more specific?
Well, I probably should defer to council or the administrator, but I think if your motion can at least give us direction to proceed with the contract, then I think we would do that.
So you're talking about the contract with the facilitator?
The facilitator.
And putting together your RFQ, RFPs. Yeah, so the motion would be to proceed with contacting Oregon Consensus to determine how to contract with SAM and to move forward with putting together the RFP/RFQs to facilitate the outside experts assisting with this process.
And commissioners, I would also ask that you do include the language that's in the motion as well, because it refers specifically to the implementation plan, which is what you're being asked to endorse, embrace, adopt today.
I'd be happy to make that motion.
Okay, so are we doing two separate motions, one that Vance said and then this one as well?
I think that'd be cleanest.
Okay, so who would someone like to make the motion as stated by county council?
So moved.
Right here, second.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And I also move to approve the draft implementation plan and timeline and direct staff to continue to refine and begin next steps as soon as possible. I also move to direct staff to develop a frequent reporting schedule for board updates and review throughout the work of the work group project.
I have a question.
Okay, if we second the motion, then we can have discussion.
Second,
All right, discussion.
early on, there was a mention of adding, I think, 1.0 to the schedule.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Develop common understanding.
Yes.
Oh,
I will accept that friendly amendment.
And do you agree to the second?
Second.
All right, motion made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And Erica, you got that amendment to that second motion?
That's her superpower.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I just, Sam underscored the need for board leadership, and you've done well, and we really appreciate your support. So thank
Yeah,
you.
oh, yep, we are giving you our urgent support to maintain momentum. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up on the agenda, we have department requests. We have House Bill 4004, Workforce Stability Grant Utilization. And I believe we have Ricky Garcia and Ashley Talamontes with Behavioral Health with us. To kick us off, we have Tracy Martineau and Rick Krager.
Good morning,
Tracy, go ahead.
commissioners. Thank you for allowing me to frame up this conversation a little bit, give you a little more context around it. The behavioral health managers had a tight deadline to work under to be able to submit the report for this grant. And that deadline, I believe, is August 1st. So in the course of preparing for this, they engaged in several activities simultaneously. Thank you, John. Including surveying other counties to see what they were doing, other partners that they had, and gathering just a tremendous amount of information. So I share that with you to explain some of the level of detail that you have before you today. You have quite a bit of information in front of you. In general, though, the objective today is to share with you that the proportion of the grant that they want to move forward with is 75% for employee compensation and 25% related to recruiting activities. Now, because some proportion of that grant is related to employee compensation, we've already engaged in conversations and meetings with AFSCME to negotiate the impact of that, as we're required to do under the Public Employees Collective Bargaining Act. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ricky and Ashley, and Rick Krager and I will be here as resources in the background if you have any questions related to personnel or finance.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so like what Tracy said, we've done a lot of meetings, a lot of conversations about this grant and how other counties would be using it. So we spoke with Deschutes, Lynn, Lincoln, and other county directors, getting their take on it. Generally, the take is very similar to the same proposal we have in front of you. We have had a conversation with AFSCME and took feedback from them as well, which influenced changes on this, as well as clarification from the state. Our goal is to be equitable amongst our staff, regardless of position, but also looking at the longevity of some of our staff and looking for ways to call that out and separate that. The 75% piece is pretty well spelled out there. There are some things that I just wanted to make sure too that everyone's aware of. There's been some changes as far as the number of positions, because it changes with vacancies and people leaving and people hiring. So this is kind of a moving target as we're going through this. We have several positions that are in the works, which this will help benefit too, as far as expansions to core and aid and assist and those kind of things. Those positions are QMHP positions, which are generally our hardest vacancies to fill at this point. So we're really hopeful and looking down the road. And then alongside all this, the state is also looking at different ways that they can help invest in the workforce by looking at loan repayment and those kind of things as well. So this is one piece of an overall bigger picture from the state, and we're trying to use it in the essence of the grant in the House bill, making sure that we're using it focused on retention and recruitment. And then, when it comes to the 25% piece, as that we get to that, where there's a little bit more flexibility, that's something where we're going to engage our staff directly and work with them to see ways that we're using that. We're going to use it for recruitment, but also retention. So, it's really important for us to hear the voice of the staff as we go forward with that. So that's why in that section, it's more general ideas and terms, because it's more flexible as far as the funding goes. Ashley, am I missing anything?
No, I think you highlighted everything. It is a very, I think, clear draft that we have written. However, it was really just meant to give a full picture of what it might look like. Again, a lot of this is moving targets in terms of the numbers, amounts, and ideas, especially with that 25%. The 25% is not set in stone to any capacity or any degree. That would be that our main goal with that really is, like Ricky said, to go back to the individuals of the department, the different teams, and identify individual needs, program needs, just however we can make the best use of that 25% given all the different factors. And yeah, the rest is just kind of a moving target. I think we won't be able to give exact numbers to OHA until it's all kind of said and done in December, hopefully. So it is a complete draft that hopefully when we do turn it in, I just have to do some minor edits. But again, we're here just to give everyone an idea of what we're proposing and kind of our thought process, just to help us move the next couple steps forward.
Thank you, Tracy.
Commissioner, if I may interject, after this meeting today, you will also see us come back, hopefully in a couple of weeks, with a memorandum of agreement once we reach agreement with AFSCME. So you will have the ability to approve the details of this spending as well.
Thank you. Any comments or questions about the general concept?
I just need a little bit of clarification. The proposal is due to OHA August 2nd, you said? So is what you have here in terms of just the narrative report, the conceptual component, is that adequate, or do we actually have to provide some rough schematic of numbers as are provided in your table on the third page?
Yeah, so good question, Commissioner. So it's due August 1st, and we do need to have specific amounts allocated to position, like the category positions, which is actually interesting because it's different than what they had on the grant. So I'll have to clarify with them how they want us to handle that. And it also doesn't include a spot for the funding for the 25%, but that would be included in our attachment. So the Word document piece that was provided to you guys today, that's kind of the draft distribution report. That's something we would attach with those specific dollar amounts.
And not the attached incentive distribution report. That's too detailed, and that's what we're not discussing today. Because that really needs to be subject to the MOA with ASPE.
Correct.
I don't have any further questions about it. I like the way it's lined out. I like the reward of for longevity in this context, and this use of some money for recruitment as well. I think it's balanced.
Thank you. So yes, my understanding is that today we are just providing support or direction on the concept, the framework, and not the spreadsheet in the packet, so that staff can go back and negotiate a memorandum of agreement with the union.
But they also have to have approval so that they can submit this proposal.
So I believe we've been asked to just provide support or direction, but not an actual motion.
Yeah, so I think that we should confer on that right now, just to make sure we're all on the same page. There is a proposed motion in your packet, commissioners.
Yeah.
I believe that proposed motion goes further than where you need to go today, because as Tracy mentioned, we'll be coming back with a MOA in a couple of weeks that will have the specificity needed, and you will approve it at that time. But I think you have two options this morning. One is to just provide our behavioral health staff with the direction that you support their general proposal. That's one option without having any motion. The other possibility is doing a motion, but a different motion than what's in your packet. And I can, if the board wants to perform a motion today, I can suggest an alternate motion versus what's in your packet.
Sure, and I think I'm good with just providing sort of a head nod or direction of support to staff at this time.
I'm fine with that. I mean, the main pieces that we're looking at seem good. I'm glad the state has recognized that we need help in this arena. So I think if it's all right with staff, just a general approval of the approach, and then come back to us with the details, hopefully in a couple of weeks with the MOU.
I hate to be a process wonk, but I'm going to be, because in terms of proposals, we do usually ask, there is usually a board role in approving, submitting a proposal, and this one is almost $1 million. And so it's definitely above the threshold where we usually give approval to proposals. So it seems to me that it would make sense to have a motion on the record just to support the proposal going to OHA. For,
I mean, so as
this
chair,
sum. And I can, I know what the truncation is. I'd be happy to provide that, but I'm looking to Vance because that is that typical process.
I understand what the three of you were saying about you're all in agreement that the idea is good and it needs to go forward back to OHA. But I think Commissioner Ogerow makes a very good point. This is a lot of money. It's not like you're being asked to approve a $1,000 request from Heartland Humane Society. So I think a motion, no offense to Heartland Humane Society, this is a significant dollar amount. It will affect a significant number of employees. So I do think a motion is probably approved.
So I'll entertain a motion.
And commissioners, I would suggest if you're going to go through with a motion that you can use the motion provided by staff. But I would suggest that you end the motion after the word initiatives and just place a period there and leave off the last 2.5 lines on that motion. And I'm referring to page 88 of your packet.
I'd be happy to make that motion. I would move to approve utilization of 75% of the House Bill 4004 Workforce Stability Grant funds to offer workforce investment payments to eligible current and future Behavioral Health Division employees, and utilization of 25% of the grant funds for staff satisfaction, development, and recruitment engagement initiatives.
I'll second that.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And I will just say that I look forward to seeing and approving the future MOA that staff and the unions produce for us.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, and with that, we will move into information sharing. First up is myself, and at the moment I cannot think of anything, so I will move on to Commissioner Malone.
Just a minute.
I did move on kind of fast, huh?
One thing, looking forward to the Benton County Fair next week. Long-term forecast says wonderful weather, 80 degrees, cool at night, and hopefully the forecast is accurate and we will be finished with the really hot weather, because that really impacts the attendance and how much fun people can have at the fair, or how long they can be there. But we had a nice event Saturday in Philomath, kind of further commemoration of the Shipley donation of land for the Mount Union Cemetery. And there was a roadside marker that's a little ways off the highway in Newton Creek Park, but there was a dedication for that project Saturday, well attended. And I thought I had towards the end of the ceremony and visiting was be nice if there was a connection between the roadside marker and the actual cemetery. I know when we were going there, there was a little confusion where we were going to meet, and I'll talk to the Philomath folks and see about some signage or markers to make that connection between the marker and the actual cemetery that's a little ways up the hill. We got wonderful news Friday afternoon that through Congressman DeFazio's efforts, that the Benton County Transit got approximately $1.5 million. The process is not finished. That bill passed the House and now needs to go through the Senate, but that would be a real game changer for updating our equipment and getting some electric buses and charging stations, and get us a nice ways along transitioning from fossil fuels to more efficient, more planet friendly transportation options. I have a monthly meeting with Corvallis Mayor Traber, and it's nice to share city concerns and how the county is involved of some of those efforts, whether it's the JSIP project or other issues like that. Because we're definitely both involved in that project and houseless efforts that we try to coordinate between the city and the county. Nice to, I think, when I talked to the mayor last Wednesday, city council had just had a meeting, so a lot of the information was nice and fresh. So I think that's what I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Malone. Commissioner Ojero.
Thank you. I wanted to just let you all know that I was able to go over to visit the Veterans Stand Down last week that was held over at the Elks. Our Veteran Service Office through the COG, led by Molly Murphy, was there with her two new staff people, Mark Lipinskis and Ian Briggs. I got a chance to meet both of those gentlemen. And heard some wonderful compliments from other partners in the community that support veterans about Molly Murphy and her leadership. So it was wonderful to hear, and I passed that along to her when I saw her. They had a great turnout, and this particular event is targeted for veterans broadly, but particularly for veterans that are unhoused. So both COI and Corvallis Housing First were also there and were popular stops. They were providing backpacks, et cetera, for folks to help them out. So that was a good event. I wish I had been able to be there longer, got there right at the tail end. I also really enjoyed the dedication ceremony by the Oregon Historical Marker Board and the Baha'i faith group that sponsored that historical marker, and the city of Paloma that Commissioner Malone mentioned. The highlights for me were the remarks by Mayor Johnson of Albany and Jason Dorsett from NAACP, as well as the incredible vocals by a woman named Marilyn Keller, who's down from Portland. Jazz vocalist with a beautiful voice. So it was a great event. I wanted to let you all know that I am going to be going over to Lebanon for the Comp Northwest White Coat Ceremony this coming Friday morning. I will not be attending the CSAC meeting with AOC because of that, the County Solutions meeting. It looks like a substantive meeting, so I don't know whether either of you will be attending. And I also will be going to visit the Corvallis Municipal Court, the Problem Solving Court, this Wednesday. I was supposed to go last month, but COVID failed me and I couldn't make it. And I understand that it's working really well, and I'm eager to see how that Problem Solving Court functions and the relationships that are being built in support of folks that commit low-level violations in the community that need community support. I also wanted to mention that I am going to be on vacation. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be leaving the 9th of August, and I'll be out through the 18th of August. So maybe back a little bit sooner, but that's what I have blocked out at this point in time. So I'll be bailing out of meetings for that period of time.
Will you be at goal setting or your?
I will not be at goal setting.
All right, anything else?
That does bring up one question for me, though. I know that performance review, and I don't know whether we were anticipating dealing with that for you
Actually,
at that meeting or at a different one.
Yeah, regarding my performance review, commissioners, it's due August 1st. I have not completed my self-assessment yet. July is the month where I have 5 performance evaluations for department heads plus my own, and so I prioritize theirs first. We were targeting initially the goal setting on August 9th, but I frankly think we're going to be the goal setting in September. And I haven't talked to Tracy since I got back from vacation yesterday, but that's kind of what we were thinking prior to me leaving. So I'll check in with her. And so it's important to me that all 3 commissioners are there when we do it.
Yes,
thank you.
Agreed. Anything else for yours? All right.
Thank you.
Next up is Joe Kirby, County Administrator.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just a couple of quick updates, Commissioners. As you know, I was on vacation last week, so I am inundated with emails. So if you have sent me an email and I haven't responded and there's an urgent issue, please bring that to my attention because frankly, I am really inundated with emails as you are as well when you go on vacation. So just a heads up there. Also, just want to make sure that this is on the board's radar. On Wednesday, we have a long tenured employee by the name of Debbie Wine who will be retiring, and there is a reception on this Wednesday for her. And so please try and make sure you can attend one of those opportunities on Wednesday. Also, on August 5th, there should be a forest tour on your calendar. I don't know if there's been any additional specificity provided in email last week when I was gone, but if not, we'll continue to work on giving greater specificity there so you're aware of what will be happening on that day. Lastly, I do meet with Mark Shepard, the city manager of Corvallis, on a monthly basis. That meeting is this Wednesday. So if there are any issues that you think I need to bring up with the administrator, please let me, or the city manager, please let me know.
Wouldn't mind dipping back for a moment because there are a couple other things that I'm planning to do the first week of August. I know we have the forest tour on the 5th, but I will probably end up bailing out a little bit earlier because I want to go to the Oregon Business and Industrial Council's tour of HP that afternoon. And I'm also planning on going on their investment tour up to see Intel and to see the facility. I'm blanking the name of that up in Scappoose that Betsy Johnson was so instrumental in creating.
Or Mac.
It's an AC, but I can't remember exactly what the first letters are.
Manufacturing.
Yeah, exactly.
Is one of the
OMAC.
letters.
Yeah, I think it's OMAC. And I'm very interested in that. So I'm going to take the day, Wednesday the 3rd, and go up and do that. I will not be there for leadership team.
I have a question about, you mentioned the forestry tour, and I see is that meeting here?
Actually, they will pick us up and then they take us out.
Right, but the pickup is here.
That's
Okay.
correct.
I'm just curious. So I see that hold backup for BOC JSIP space planning meeting on my calendar. Are we still?
That one, we're still keeping that as a hold on your calendar. We are attempting to bring to you what we have on August 2nd. August 5th is a backup meeting. However, August 5th is not ideal because Lori's participation from DLR is questionable on August 5th. And it's really beneficial for her to be involved directly in those meetings. So we're trying to accomplish what we can on August 2nd, knowing that we still have a backup of August 5th if we absolutely need it, but it's less than ideal.
Okay. But as far as that should work. If we're here for one meeting, we'll still be here for the next. So we don't have to factor in driving time. Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you.
I had one additional comment. The COG, after searching for 8 or 9 months, maybe, as a PIO. And so Corey, have you made contact there?
Not yet, but I can follow up.
Okay. That was, we were both searching for all of this year. So I think we're getting in better shape as far as communications and being more proactive in that arena.
Okay, yeah, we'll put it on the radar for sure.
And pretty soon I'll remember her name, but
if you do, maybe just send an email.
okay, I will do that.
All right. Anything else?
Nope.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
Hit the hammer.
Here it is. We will adjourn at 11:17 a.m. so much.